San Antonio, Texas, late 2015, a police officer named Hunter Westbrook, a campus patrolman for the University of San Antonio, discovered that overdose rates had begun to rise on his precinct. And not just a rise, it had become an epidemic. Almost daily, someone in the class ended up in the hospital. Westbrook knew that from weed, the favorite drug of all students, this does not happen, and began his own investigation, which revealed that pills were doing the rounds. The most popular among young people were Xanax, Adderall, Oxycodone, which, when exceeding the prescription dose, give relaxation and a high. But a strange thing happened. Using the usual amount, the student who was having fun suddenly lost consciousness and literally stopped breathing. And later, blood work would show up containing fentanyl or methamphetamine, dangerous substances that are not included in the original pills. That's how Westbrook first heard the name Alaa Muhammad Allawi. This guy was a small-time local drug dealer who supplied pot and pills to students looking to get high. He was the one who had been pointed to by those in the hospitals and those Westbrook had managed to talk to. Gradually, watching Allawi, Westbrook began to realize that Allawi was not a small-time dealer. Allawi drove the coolest cars, rented the best houses in San Antonio, and wore the most expensive clothes. In short, looked not like a street pusher, but like a drug lord. A vigilant police officer, having gathered enough evidence, arranged a meeting with an agent of the local drug police. In the spring of 2016, after months of surveillance, he sat in a cafe and compared his information with that of Janelle Valle, a narcotics officer who was part of a joint task force with the DEA. They suddenly realized that their findings matched. Alaa Allawi, an immigrant from the Middle East, was flooding the University of Texas campus with counterfeit pills that were causing numerous overdoses. But the most important thing agents didn't know yet was how vast the humble Iraqi immigrant's empire was. Meet Alaa Allawi on the other side of the law. Alaa Allawi was born and raised in the suburbs of Baghdad. He was 13 years old when the US invaded his country. Allawi had been learning English since childhood on the advice of a doctor uncle, which was rare in those parts, so at 18 he applied for a job as a translator for the US Army and got a position at Rashid Air Base near Baghdad, where he moved from one unit to another. But as good as the job paid, $1,350 a month, it was also dangerous. Al-Qaeda was extremely negative toward locals in the service of the Americans. One of the translators, an acquaintance of Allawi's, was tied to a car and dragged through the mountains until his limbs were torn off. Another was hung from a pole with a warning sign. But that didn't stop him. He started wearing a mask and gloves while patrolling his neighborhood, and no one recognized him. There were moments when Allawi felt like a traitor. He recounted one raid when the Americans were searching for a suspected Al-Qaeda collaborator. After a successful arrest, the soldiers were missing a radio telephone and began interrogating the frightened women left in the house. When it came to the oldest woman, an officer asked Allawi to step out. He obeyed, and after a while, the woman ran out crying, while the others fell to their knees before him, begging him to persuade the Americans to stop torturing them. They said the officer had searched the elderly, honorable Muslim woman with extreme prejudice. Allawi was furious but could not do anything. I felt not only rage, but also the humiliation of a man whose country had been invaded, he later recounted. Eventually, the soldiers found the phone on the refrigerator where one of them had left it. Other than that, Allawi has adapted quite well to the American world. Thanks to years of watching Hollywood movies, learning the language, and listening to hip-hop, he was well versed in their culture and didn't mind when they crossed their legs or went barefoot, which is considered an insult in the Arab world. Allawi was trusted on the base, eating lunch with everyone else and even bringing hookahs to the workers' carriages and soldiers' barracks. It was there that he learned that American soldiers were obsessed with steroids, and somehow it just so happened that he began distributing them to the soldiers, for which he was soon dismissed from the unit. A few months later, nothing prevented Allawi from taking another job as a translator, this time with AGS ACOM, a private contractor rebuilding maintenance depot at Camp Taji, also near Baghdad. Allawi spent his days sitting at a computer in a special room, translating instruction manuals for equipment the US was reselling to Iraq. Allawi loved computers and really got into the job. As he said himself, he used half of his working hours to learn programming and hacking. and it must be said quite successfully. He hacked into his boss's email account, found the messages he sent to his mistress, and forwarded them to his boss's wife. After that, the internet was turned off in his cubicle, but with his good salary, Allawi bought his own PC on which no one limited his access. He created a dating site called Iraqiya.com aimed at young Iraqis. At the platform's peak, he was earning about $5,000 a month from subscriptions. He also started getting orders for website development from local businessmen. Allawi bought a server and started his own hosting company, believing for a while that he could build a career back home. At AGS, he met a Texas native named Eric Goss, with whom he became firm friends amid a fascination with hip-hop culture. Goss, back in Houston, began encouraging the savvy Iraq to move to the United States. For a while, Allawi was reluctant, believing that he could build a career in Iraq, but he quickly realized how limited his opportunities for full development in the field of information technology were. Many of his former colleagues had long since left for the States under a special program. Goss kept asking him to visit, and finally, on September 12, 2012, Allawi landed at the San Antonio airport with a firm intention of continuing the family business and becoming a doctor in a country where dreams come true. Catholic Charities gave Allawi a driver's license, food stamps, a $200 monthly stipend, and free housing. He earned an online high school diploma and then enrolled in paramedic classes at San Antonio College. But that's where the pros of life came into play. Food stamps and free rent were only valid for 6 months. After that, Allawi had to find his own place to live and earn his own food while attending college. To make ends meet, he took a job as a machine operator at a door factory 45 minutes away from his studies. The pay barely covered his travel, food, and rent. Allawi soon got in touch with another former translator named Muhammad al-Salihi, who had only recently arrived in Texas and was moonlighting as a bouncer. Allawi moved in with him. Salihi's free apartment also had another spare room, which they decided to rent out to make some extra money. According to Allawi, their first tenant was a young woman who liked to smoke pot with her friends. Soon, Allawi was hanging out with them and knew where to get the product. He also spent enough time with college students to see an opportunity to make money because he already had expertise selling anabolics on military bases. So Allawi started selling marijuana at parties near the University of Texas in San Antonio. At the time, he was still planning to continue his education and even took out a student loan. The plan was simple: sell pot at parties, pay the bills, and go to school. But one thing he didn't consider was that where there is pot, there are strong substances, and this applies not only to use but also to distribution. Allawi began contacting other pot dealers and suppliers, which came in handy when he was evicted in 2014 for non-payment of $590 in rent. He slept in his car for a while and began selling crack on the street to survive. On January 14, 2015, Allawi was arrested while driving a car with a small-time drug dealer whom local law enforcement knew by sight. An officer searching the car found less than a gram of cocaine, 10 Adderall pills, and about 100 Xanax pills. Allawi argued at trial that the pills belonged to a passenger. He was charged with the manufacturing and delivering of a controlled substance, but because he had no criminal record, he was sentenced to community service. However, this first encounter with the law did not frighten him. By the time his community service ended, Allawi had reconnected with an old buddy, Goss, who had got him a job designing a website for a company in Austin. And it was there, in the office, that a co-worker told Allawi he was buying drugs on the dark web. "It's like Amazon for drugs," the unsuspected programmer shared. Allawi immediately started looking for information about it, and a world of never-before-seen opportunities opened before him that combined everything he knew how to do. At the time, Silk Road had already been shut down, but with the Tor browser and Bitcoin, it was still possible to dive into the dark web and buy anything from guns to Oxycodone pills with the promise of complete anonymity. According to the FBI, between 2015 and 2017, more than $1 billion worth of illegal cryptocurrency transactions were made on a dark web site called Alphabay. On May 23, 2015, Allawi created an account on Alphabay, registering as Dopeboy210. And by the fall of that year, Allawi finally said goodbye to his studies and began a new phase of his life. He bought a pill press on eBay, capable of stamping 21,600 pills per hour. He also bought all the non-narcotic ingredients of his future product, such as dyes, legally on eBay. Allawi stocked up on meth from his buddies and later began directly ordering precursors from China to cook the increasingly popular and very economical synthetic opioid fentanyl. Fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine, and it takes only a little to get high, but even a small overdose leads to depression of the respiratory system. The cough center in the brain shuts down, breathing slows down and can stop altogether. That is, literally, the user forgets how to breathe. This is the most common fatal consequence of overdosing. In the end, the Dope Boy 210 store offered no less than 80 different items. Customers were especially fond of X50, a pack of 50 Xanax pills, which became his flagship product and earned him many rave reviews on Alphabay. In addition, Allawi hasn't abandoned the now familiar University of Texas San Antonio market. Prescription anxiety pills such as Xanax and Oxycodone and an ADHD drug very popular in the US called Adderall were consistently in demand among students when over the prescription dosage they provided a buzz and vigor for all-night partying. Demand was high, but supply was limited. The pharmaceutical companies were not producing enough of these drugs to meet all the demand. So Allawi, like other quick-thinking drug dealers across the US, began stamping fake wheels that looked exactly like the original ones. Obviously, he didn't have access to real ingredients like alprazolam, so he settled for whatever he could mix into his product. First, it was street meth, and then it was Chinese fentanyl. Fentanyl was a real boon to greedy dealers back then. At minimal consumption, it produced a huge amount of product with a powerful effect that quickly went viral. Like Allawi, fentanyl was just beginning its deadly journey on the American market. Allawi was rapidly expanding his network and needed reliable associates. One Benjamin Uno, a 20-year-old Dallas native he met at a party. Uno's basketball career had been cut short due to an injury, and he was at the point of choosing another direction in his life. They were soon joined by another Trevor Robinson, a mustachioed Malcolm X fan. Uno helped Allawi manufacture the pills, and he and Robinson were responsible for mailing the product. Allawi also hired Al Salehi, his former roommate, to guard the drugs hidden in an apartment 10 minutes from the university. Allawi's profits came in the form of Bitcoin, and he needed to convert them to cash. On localbitcoins.com, a cryptocurrency exchange platform, he met Kunal Kara from California, a Bitcoin fanatic who had turned his cigar store into a veritable money changer. Allawi began stopping by Kara's to exchange his Bitcoin earnings for cash and paid him a commission for his help. By the fall of 2016, the two men had moved their business online. In total, they transferred more than $500,000. Business was booming. Pills were instantly flying around the state in envelopes. But Allawi and his team couldn't vouch for the quality. They weren't chemists and cared little about how much of the deadly fentanyl got into their product. It could be a little bit or it could be too much. At the same time as their success, overdose deaths were on the rise across America. 18,335 people died from fentanyl overdoses in 2016, up from 1,663 in 2011. Such depressing statistics could not pass by the DEA. The familiar market was rapidly changing, but it was still unclear what direction to take to minimize the damage and deaths. And then Westbrook came along with his observations of the University of Texas campus, and the San Antonio investigation began. But the DEA's San Antonio office was made up entirely of the old officers, seasoned crime fighters experienced in tracking down the old ways of working with street dealers, informants, and Mexican cartels. There were no new bargains on the streets. The cartels fought their turf wars, and people continued to die from overdoses. In July 2016, an informant tipped off the DEA about Allawi's online shop and took the investigation in a whole new direction. The DEA's San Antonio office had never dealt with cybercrime. Sure, they had heard of Silk Road, but to them the dark web was Baghdad. As one agent put it, it was all so far away. The difficult burden fell to the enterprising Westbrook, who became the de facto head of the department largely because he was the only one with even a vague understanding of what the dark web was. The agents at headquarters set up tour to visit the dark web. They were in for a nasty surprise. the Dope Boy 210 drugstore wasn't just thriving. Judging by the hundreds of comments left by satisfied customers, Allawi was a major retailer, a real drug lord. The only thing left to do was to somehow tie him, the real Allawi, to the Dope Boy store. A control purchase on the dark web was required, which required an Alpha Bay account and Bitcoin. But even more difficult, it required authorization from a higher authority for such an operation. So, while Westbrook pounded the pavement, his experienced colleagues in the DEA office did what they knew how to do: track down suspects and work with informants. In early 2017, the task force convinced the judge to authorize GPS tracking and phone tapping of Uno and Allawi, and later Al-Salihi. In March, Westbrook followed Uno from Allawi's home to the post office, where Uno mailed 3 boxes and a garbage bag full of what looked like envelopes. Postal inspectors then began intercepting mail and packages destined for Allawi. The Iraqi immigrant was living large. He made a down payment of $30,000 for a 2-story house in an upscale residential neighborhood in San Antonio, south of the university. Accompanied by his buddy Goss, he made several trips to the city's high-end car dealerships and had his eye on a white 2013 Maserati Gran Turismo that cost $49,000. Allawi paid exclusively in cash despite Goss's warning. He didn't want to take out a car loan because he had to pay interest. A few months later, Allawi arrived at a car service center to change the oil on one of his cars. Surprised workers beckoned him over and pointed to a strange black box in the back of the hood. It was a tracking device. Allawi quickly stomped on it and tensed up just a little, but didn't pay much attention. He was sure that the dark web would grant him complete anonymity and impunity. And actually, it was so, but his greed made him not give up business in the real world where he was tracked down. And he didn't care about agents. At the time, Allawi was on top of the world. By spring of 2017, he owned luxury cars, dressed only in expensive limited collections, and lived in the best houses. He was even in talks to open a franchise for a juice bar chain. On March 23rd, he went to Las Vegas with his boys. Allawi, Uno, Robinson, and Goss walked into Dre's, a giant nightclub known as one of the most expensive in the city. Their favorite, Lil Wayne, was performing there. Allawi, dressed in a $2,000 suit, emptied a giant bottle of Veuve Clicquot into a circle, a spectacular gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the rapper on stage. "I don't know who these niggas are, but I want to party with them," Lil Wayne said. According to Goss, after the concert, Lil Wayne also came up to take a picture with such big fan of his. And while Allawi and his buddies were having fun in Vegas, their pills were reaching their intended recipients. A young man from the Midwest named Vincent Jordal was recovering from a near-death experience that same day. He crumbled a pill and snorted a blue powder, fentanyl, and collapsed on the floor of his living room. His mother found him and performed CPR before medics revived him with naloxone, the antidote to fentanyl. On March 25th, medics rushed to the home of another man named Orlando Flores, who had also overdosed on pills containing fentanyl and survived. The pills were in a package sent to Allawi in early March. Less than a month later, the East Coast 2 Marines, Villegas and Mambolao, bought Oxycodone pills for a party while on leave. Villegas purchased them directly from an Alpha Bay seller named Dope Boy 210. They swallowed them at the same time, but after a while, Mambolao felt sick, lost consciousness, and died of respiratory arrest. It turned out that the pill Mambolao swallowed contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. The Naval Criminal Investigative Services launched an investigation into the circumstances surrounding his death. Working with the Postal Inspection Service and DEA, NCIS traced the drugs back to Allawi, and Mambolao became a tragic case in artisanal drug production. It was his pill that accidentally contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. In the meantime, Westbrook managed to get permission from his superiors to conduct the first ever controlled purchase in the history of San Antonio on the dark web network using cryptocurrency. The police officer himself had already earned the nickname Millennial among his colleagues, and a sign on his office read Millennial Sanctuary. On March 17, 2017, a matronly DEA task force in San Antonio peered over Westbrook's shoulder with bated breath as he logged into his personal account on Alpha Bay. Going to the Dopeboy 210 shop page, Westbrook ordered 500 Adderall pills worth $1,400 and 30 grams of cocaine for $1,200 in absolute silence. He specified a mailbox on the University of San Antonio campus and completed the order, clicking victoriously in the same deafening silence. A week later, he drove to campus to pick up the package from mailbox number 825, but to his surprise, he was missing the goods. There were only 447 pills and not a gram of cocaine, so Westbrook immediately initiated a dispute with Alpha Bay, which however ended in Allawi's favor. But those were the little things. What really mattered was that DEA agents had conducted the first undercover purchase on the dark web. The San Antonio DEA had entered a world of online commerce that old-school agents didn't even know existed. What happened next was a matter of technique. At the beginning of a hot Texas May, a man in an orange vest knocked on the door of the house where Uno and Robinson were hanging out, preparing new deliveries, and told them that there would be no electricity for the next 24 hours. The agent's calculation was correct. No one in Texas would stay in a house without air conditioning, and soon the two drove to another safe house. The first item on the DEA's plan was to destroy the pill stamping point because it posed a threat to the public. At 1:38 p.m., agents in chemical defense suits flooded the house. The suits were meant to protect them from fentanyl dust, which could incapacitate or even kill them, so they assumed at the time. The search was quite fruitful. 2 giant pill presses, cardboard boxes from China with ingredients, and enough product to put Allawi behind bars for a long time. 500 grams of fentanyl powder, 500 grams of methamphetamine, 500 grams of cocaine, 10 kilograms of counterfeit fentanyl-laced Oxycodone pills, 4 kilograms of counterfeit methamphetamine-laced Adderall, and 5 kilograms of counterfeit Xanax pills, not counting the non-narcotic substances used to stamp the pills. The search also found a Ruger revolver and a Sig Sauer pistol hidden in a couch in the living room, and in Allawi's bedroom they found an AR-15 assault rifle and a loaded Glock pistol. While the agents were working, Uno and Robinson drove by the house and realized what was going on. According to Westbrook, not only were they not startled by the raid, but they returned to the scene with Allawi. As they drove away for the last time, all three defiantly threw their cell phones out of the car window. Shortly thereafter, Allawi called Goss from a new number and asked him to meet him at a posh house he was renting east of Houston. There, he picked up a bag full of $50,000 in cash and asked his friend to drive him to the airport. The ringleader decided to hide out in Los Angeles, where he had an apartment in a fashionable Westwood neighborhood. His empire was crumbling before his eyes. "I'm screwed, it's over," he kept repeating in the car. Like any good drug lord, Allawi began planning his escape. According to Goss, he considered hiding out in Dallas or California. When things settled down, he could return to Iraq, where the money he had sent over the years had allowed his family to open a shopping center. He also considered crossing the Mexican border illegally. But in the weeks after the raid, the cops never came after him. Allawi wondered if he had gotten away with it. Eventually, he relaxed and returned to Texas. One night in late June, he and Goss went to a club and sat in the VIP area, a $500 bottle of champagne on the table. But Allawi wasn't as chatty as usual. He was silent, not even touching his glass. Friends were returning from the club in silence. "I feel like a martyr," Allawi said suddenly, "but I've taken care of my whole family. If I die tomorrow, it was not in vain." It was as if he had a premonition of his imminent punishment. Just a few days later, the Drug Enforcement Administration launched a sting operation on Allawi's crew in simultaneous raids in Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. Uno, Robinson, Al-Salihi, and Goss were arrested. The same was true of Kara. Allawi was taken in a huge rented house in a Houston suburb. The raid team tried to ram the door, but the bartender splurged on a $10,000 reinforced model. The team had to break into the house through a window. Inside, they found Allawi dressed in black pants and a white polo. He told agents they had nothing on him, even as investigators seized a Bitcoin wallet, 12 disposable phones, 4 small bags of blue chemical binder, and a Colt .45 caliber. After DEA agents made it clear that they had more than enough evidence, Allawi calmed down and stopped emerging. Sitting in a driveway handcuffed, cross-legged and slightly disheveled, he looked more like the young Iraqi who smoked hookah with American contractors than the leader of a successful drug business drinking 5-liter bottles of Veuve Clicquot. He lay on his side, curled up in a ball on the sidewalk and closed his eyes. In June 2017, a grand jury indicted Allawi on charges of conspiracy to distribute fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine, possession of a firearm during a drug trafficking offense, and conspiracy to launder money. The mountain of evidence against Allawi was overwhelming. So overwhelming that Anthony Cantrell, his court-appointed attorney, said the trial would take months and put a strain on his practice. Instead, Allawi pleaded guilty to conspiracy to possess and distribute fentanyl, causing death or serious bodily injury, and to using a weapon during a drug offense. Investigators estimated that Allawi made at least $14 million from his criminal activities and sold at least 850,000 counterfeit pills in 38 states. Cantrell said Allawi saw a growing market for the pills and capitalized on it through his operation as one of the first to do so. He was one of the first people we saw doing this on a large scale. Allawi was a pioneer. At sentencing, Allawi showed remorse with his entire appearance. "I screwed up. It was a big mistake," he said, and asked for clemency. But the court showed no such mercy. As part of a plea bargain, Allawi was sentenced to 30 years in a federal prison in northern Louisiana and then transferred to a medium security facility in New York State. After serving his sentence, he would be deported back to Iraq. Meanwhile, Uno, Robinson, Al-Salihi, and Kara pleaded guilty and received prison sentences ranging from 18 months to 10 years. The judge was more lenient on Goss, who pleaded guilty to conspiracy to possess cocaine and was given a 5-year suspended sentence. Allawi argued that while the US was gripped by a devastating fentanyl epidemic while he ran his drug business, he had never heard of overdoses or the damage it can cause. But it was dealers like him selling counterfeit pills laced with homemade fentanyl, which authorities say has led to so much death and destruction. Authorities shut down Alpha Bay about a month after Allawi's arrest, but the fentanyl boom was unstoppable. 4 years after Allawi's arrest in 2021, the number of overdose deaths rose to 106,000, and revenue for the dark websites that year totaled $3.1 billion. Revenue dropped in 2022, largely due to the closure of another giant called Hydra. But even so, small illegal marketplaces still made $1.5 billion. Until 2019, most of the fentanyl was supplied by China via international mail and private parcels. But the postal controls that China imposed disrupt the flow, and the initiative has now been taken over by Mexican cartels, buying legal chemical precursors from China and producing so much fentanyl that the US is literally drowning in it. All social workers are required to carry a vial of naloxone, a specific antidote to restoring breathing in a fentanyl overdose. In some cities and districts, this requirement even extends to elementary school teachers. In 2022, the Drug Enforcement Administration seized the equivalent of 379 million potentially lethal doses of fentanyl, more than the population of the entire country. In 2023, a record 112,000 people died from fentanyl overdoses in the United States, meaning that every 4 minutes that year, a person between the ages of 18 and 45 died.